Good morning. Today's Tuesday, April 21st. I hope you guys had a great day off yesterday. It's your last day off until Memorial Day, which is end of May, and then we come back and we finish the school year after that. Um, so I want you to understand we actually skipped chapter 14 and we went to chapter 15, which was reform last week, and it was because chapter 14 really is the predecessor to why we end up in the Civil War. And so I wanted to pull that together to make it more continual while you were learning about what caused the Civil War. So today we're going to start talking about, this whole chapter is about the difference between the North and the South. And we've talked about this before, it's nothing new. The North was more industrialized. They didn't have great farming, they didn't have the weather. We talked about this like in New England. And then we talked about the Southern colonies, way back before we even became a country, and they were more agricultural. Well, this difference between the industry versus agriculture continues through the Civil War. And honestly, if you look at even the United States today, the North still is much more, and the Midwest is much more industrialized than the South. The South still makes most of its living agriculturally. We do have in the South some big cities, and there is some industry, but it's not the same as up north even today. So let's start talking about the North today. New technology really increased and helped the North become more industrialized. And the Industrial Revolution in the United States actually went through 3 phases. The first phase was that originally, when people were making cloth, one person would spin the cotton into thread, then that thread would get woven into cloth. Well, the first phase is that instead of having one person do all of that, you had each person do a specific type, a specific job. For instance, one person only did spinning, and then they would give the spun thread to the next person. The next person would then weave it into cloth. And then the next person would take that cloth and make it into, cut it into pieces, and then somebody else would sew it into a dress, etc. And that's the first phase, that you divide the jobs. And then after they started doing that, they realized you could build a factory. This is phase 2. You'd build a factory and you'd bring these different people all in the same building. So you'd have one group of people just spinning thread. Then you'd have another group of people just weaving. And you have another group that just did the cutting, and then another group would just do the sewing of the dresses. But they were all in the same building. So that was phase 2. Then the third phase was actually starting to use machines. Prior to this, you used your foot pedal. You would spin with your hand, whatever. It was all done manually. The third phase is that we started using machinery. And that's why the industrialization really started up in New England area, because they had a lot of streams, and they were using the rivers and the streams to make the water wheels go around, and those water wheels would then crank gears inside the factory, and that would make the machinery work. And really, the industrialization started in New England, and it went through the Midwest and into the other northern states. Okay, another new part at this was transportation. There were so many new technologies in transportation. We've talked about the roads, we've talked about canals already. Well, now we have more roads. At this point, we get more canals. They make the canals deeper and wider. And then we end up with, remember Robert Fulton and the Claremont? We've talked about him prior to this. And he developed that steamship. And it was the steamship that would go up and down the rivers. And then they changed the canals. They make them deeper and wider. So now they can use steamships going up and down the canals. Now it's easier to get people and goods across the United States. Another industrial transportation increase that made it better was a clipper ship. They called them clipper ships because they clipped about half the time off. Instead of taking 3 to 4 weeks to go from England to the United States, it's now taking like 14 days. So that's a big difference. You can get supplies places quicker, you can get people quicker. Another big industrial revolution at this time were railroads. And when we talk about transportation, were railroads. Railroads were huge because you only need one energy source to pull hundreds of train cars. And at the beginning, these railroads, where you actually only went in like the coal mines, and they used donkeys and mules to get the coal in and out. Then they realized if they put a steam engine on it, it would go much faster. And like I said, you could do hundreds of cars. And if you've ever been stuck waiting for a train to go by, you'll notice it's not an engine and 10 cars. It's not an engine and 20 cars. There could be hundreds and hundreds of cars, especially if you've ever been to Chicago. That's the railroad capital of the United States. You may sit there for like 15, 20 minutes waiting for a train to go by. The first one was called the Tom Thumb. And what's funny is you're going to read about this, that they actually were like, ooh, hyping up the Tom Thumb, this railroad engine, steam engine. And it competed against a mule pulling the same cars. And the mule and horse actually won because the Tom Thumb actually had problems with the engine that day. But that became a really big issue, and people actually started seeing how there was a benefit in using the steam engines. In 1840, there were about 3,000 miles of track in the United States for railroads. By 1860, just 20 years later, there were 31,000 miles. Most of them are up north and in the Midwest. There weren't as many in the South, and that's going to be an issue during the Civil War, actually. Now, with all these new inventions, the trains, the steamboats, we have the canals now, we have more tracks, we have roads. It was so much easier to get goods and people in and out of areas. Remember how long it took for people to do the Oregon Trail? Well, once they put the transatlantic railroad in, it might take 2 weeks, which had taken 6 months prior to that. So much quicker. And which was really good for like the farmers that were living in the Midwest. Because remember I told you that was a breadbasket. Midwest is still a huge producer of corn and wheat and stuff like that. Well, prior to all these roads, canals, and railroads, and the steamboat, they would just take the food that they would produce, corn, wheat, whatever it was, they would put it on a boat, it would go down the Mississippi River, come out into New Orleans, and then have to go all the way to wherever it was going, and it took a long time. Well, now that we have trains and roads, now we can get things in and out so much quicker, people and things, and it made products cheaper, and that was better for the American people. Okay, well today, when you're reading, you have a choice. I don't care which strategy you use, you just have to do some type of reading strategy. You've learned quite a few. Think about what we do every day in class. I mean, I don't care if you do Cornell notes, I don't care if you do 2-sentence summaries, I don't care if you do a one-pager, I don't care if you do tweets. You decide. You decide how you want to do it. It can be a graphic novel about this section. Whatever strategy you like to use, go ahead and use it today. And then actually tomorrow you're going to finish the section and you'll be using the same one. So it's going to be 2 days in a row. So pick your favorite and let's get this work done. Most of you did take the test. If you did not, I'm going to have to make an alternative test for you. And I will get back to you about that this week. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.